Hey, Stacey David here, and this is the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals since 1919. That's right, over 100 years building tools and still going strong. If you need tools, check them out. You won't be disappointed. All right, let's get rolling. Okay, if things have not gotten confusing enough over the last few years about internal combustion engines and electric vehicles and hydrogen and all of these new motors and these technologies coming out, there is a new term that has started to surface that we're hearing some, and it's called an agnostic engine. Now, I know you're probably scratching your head going, agnostic engine? What is that? Is that like out of Stephen King's new book, or what the heck? Yeah, it's kind of a bewildering statement for an engine to be fuel agnostic, is what they're calling it. You never thought that engines, would care one way or the other about fuels. But basically what the idea is behind fuel agnostic engine is that it doesn't care what kind of fuel is used in it. And so basically the idea is a multi-fuel engine. Now, for those of you that grew up around military vehicles and never worked on any of them, you're like, well, this isn't new. I mean, the military did that back in the 60s with multi-fuel engines in the Deuce and a Halfs and some of their big trucks. And it would run on propane and diesel and pretty much whatever you'd toss down it with just a few little tweaks. Well, that's kind of the idea, but this is a little different. And the ones that are really championing this right now is Cummins. And everybody knows Cummins, they make some of the best diesel engines out there. And the idea behind the fuel agnostic engine is that they will take, and this is dealing mostly with low carbon and zero carbon fuels like hydrogen, natural gas, propane, clean diesel, that kind of stuff. Obviously, gasoline is in there as well. And the idea is that in this engine family, all of the siblings in the family, so to speak, from the head gasket down are identical. So your pistons, crank, rods, all of that stuff will be the same. What they'll do is change the head and the fuel inlet, intake, all of that, depending on what type of fuel you're going to run. So if you're going to set your vehicle up to run on propane, they will set the proper induction system on top of that, but the bottom end of the engine will be the same. And it would be interchangeable without a whole lot of effort. So if you had an engine that was running on diesel and all of a sudden you wanted to swap over to natural gas after 100,000 miles or whatever, you could go in, you could swap out the head and the induction system and continue on with the same engine running on propane or natural gas or whatever. So that's actually a really good idea. It's something that Cummins obviously is looking at this for trucking companies and fleets that use a lot of fuel, but also it'd be great for us to have the option, to be able to move in and out of whatever fuels we wanted to use. For example, they're listing 3 different engine families. Like one, it would run on clean diesel, natural gas, or hydrogen. The other one in the same family would run on clean diesel, natural gas, gasoline, propane, and hydrogen. Now, one of the things that some of the people have said, they're like, well, this is the end game of the internal combustion engine. This is the last hurrah for that before EVs take over the world. And I don't see it that way. No. Actually, we're going to be getting into electric vehicles a lot in the next few podcasts and talking about this. I actually see this as a very, very smart move by Cummins because there is a lot of gasoline and diesel and propane and natural gas out there, far more than there is electric and easier to get to. And in a lot of ways, it's greener, and we'll dig into that in the next few weeks. So I see this as the natural step for the internal combustion engine, and especially for trucks, and especially for people that are carrying loads. So this is cool, and it would be really nice. I'm sure you guys are probably thinking about this. If you go down, say if you went down and bought a new Jeep and it had a diesel engine in it and you wanted it to run on natural gas, how awesome would that be? that you had that option without doing a complete motor swap, complete changing the whole thing, or just selling the vehicle and getting another one. Something to keep an eye on. But now you know. There is an agnostic engine out there. Oh, boy. That's an interesting name. You know, when gearheads get together, it isn't long until the subject of tools comes up. Because tools are what make all this possible. You guys know that. And car guys and girls are passionate about tools. What's good and what is bad. And that is one thing that I have to give Cornwell a lot of credit for. They'll listen to what the pros are saying about their tools and constantly make changes to build them better. That's why they have new screwdriver handles and ratchets and all kinds of other stuff coming out all the time. It's not just to get your money, which a lot of people think. It's the never-ending quest to build a better tool. Because Cornwell knows that if you're not working and getting paid, they're not getting paid. That's why they're America's oldest tool company and still going strong. Check them out. All right, one subject that we're going to jump into today is about the gasoline, diesel versus electric world. Now, if you haven't been up on this, you've been under a rock for the last few years, because obviously the push for electric vehicles, what we call EVs, is pretty hard, and the government's pushing on that and other people are pushing on it, and it's becoming a big deal. But the question is the electric vehicle superior, or is it equal, or is it just another player in the puzzle? And the problem is, when you start bringing up these questions, people start arguing and they start fighting based on mostly their political affiliations or whatever. And that's the problem. You can't get anywhere and solve any problems when people don't talk intelligently about the subject. People just start arguing because they don't agree politically or whatever. Well, you don't get anywhere. And so I have purposely stayed off of this subject until I could gather as many facts as I could about both sides of this. And then I wanted to present it to you guys completely unbiased. In other words, it's all going to be factual. It's all going to be gearhead stuff. It's not going to depend on, political affiliation or who's in the White House or anything like that. This is strictly looking at the facts of what an electric vehicle is and what a gasoline, diesel-powered internal combustion engine is. We call that ICE, I-C-E, internal combustion engine. So if you hear me using those terms, that's what I'm talking about. An EV, electric vehicle. ICE, internal combustion engine, which would cover gas, diesel, propane, that kind of thing. All right. So with that established, the first thing that people have to understand is, what is the difference between an engine and a motor? Boy, you ask that question, you better hold on, because you're going to get all kinds of answers from self-proclaimed experts out there and people that teach auto shop and this and that, and they will argue terms. Truth of the matter is, there's a gray area there. And the basic way to look at this, and I'm going to break this down to put it into layman's terms so we can all understand this. Basically, an engine is a machine that has a motor in it. So when you call an engine a motor, that's technically correct. However, you can't call a motor an engine. That's not correct, because the motor is a component of an engine. Now, let me explain what I'm talking about, in case your head just exploded. Okay, basically the biggest difference is, most people say that electric is a motor and then internal combustion is an engine. That's only partially true. Now, it's true that electric motors can never be called engines at this point, and I'll explain why. So it is correct to call them a motor and not an engine. But the other way, the internal combustion engine can also be called a motor, like a motorcycle or a motor sports. So why the discrepancy? That's what we're going to jump into and explain. An engine basically is a mechanical unit that takes fuel and creates its own power and then utilizes it in its own motor. Okay? So the breakdown of an internal combustion engine, when you take your fuel and you combine it with fuel, air, and spark, that creates the energy. That's what an engine does. Now, it takes that energy, when you get that explosion, it immediately utilizes that power right now on the pistons. The pistons and the crank is the motor. That is the mechanical thing that takes the power and converts it to a rotation, which gives us power, which gives us motion that we can then utilize as a tool. So the engine creates its own power and utilizes it and puts it through its internal motor and sends it out to a drive shaft that we can use. The electric motor does not create its own power. The electricity is created somewhere else in a generator. So they're separate. Then we take the electricity and we pipe it either through wires or we store it in a battery, and we take that power that's been generated and we put it into the motor, which gives us the rotation and the power that we need to do work. So if you're looking at this, and now you're kind of understanding the difference between electrical and internal combustion, you're like, well, if we go electrical, we're creating an extra step. We are, the battery. Because anytime you try to take power and harness it, immediately you start to lose that power. That's why when you charge a battery up and you take it off the battery charger and you let it sit, a few weeks later it'll be dead. Why? Because that power goes somewhere. You can't keep it at 100%. That's like trying to harness that explosion in the cylinder when that spark plug goes and harness that explosion and put it in a bottle and then use it a few weeks later. Can't do that. It's impossible. So there's always a deterioration of power. That's what we struggle with electric-powered motors. As you can see, this is the dilemma we're facing in a car. You put this in, so you have to add batteries that hold that power to turn that electric motor, whereas an internal combustion engine is creating it as it goes. You can see now where when you go to a charging station, it's ironic that the companies have made those charging stations look like a fueling station. You know, you got the big hose, you put it in the side of the car just like a gas station. Why have they done that? Well, they've done it to fool you to think that charging a vehicle up is just like putting fuel in your gas tank. But if you understand what I just explained to you, it is not the same. You're not putting the fuel in that creates the energy. The energy's already been created at the generator. Then the power is being piped into a battery, so you're just taking some of the charge. Now, you probably understand this now, and you're looking at this going, okay, so why does this matter? Well, this is very important when you start to understand, when we start talking about the efficiency and the way an electric motor compares to an ICE engine, you're going to see now where the conversation comes in about efficiency, mileage, what really affects the economy, what really affects the atmosphere, all of this stuff. Because one of the things that we're running into is that a lot of the people that are talking about electric vehicles, they're cherry picking the points that they want, just like internal combustion people can do. And if you want to get the true story, you got to look at the whole thing. So when you look at an internal combustion engine, everybody's like, okay, as that's running down the road, you have all these emissions coming out the back. And they'll say, you know, when an electric vehicle is running down the road, it has zero emissions. Well, and that's true. That's where an electric vehicle is at its best. However, it is not an emissions-free vehicle. It has created those emissions when that generator running on gas or diesel or coal rotated and made that electricity in the first place. So there are emissions going out there. They're just happening at a different time. And that's why it's important to understand the process. So now that we have an understanding about basically the difference between the technology of an electric-powered vehicle and an internal combustion powered vehicle. Now we can start to talk about how they compare straight up and what's best, for you and for your application and how you're going to use it. For those of you that did not hear the story of my account of Evel Knievel back when I was, 8 or 9 years old at the Snake River Canyon, on a podcast a while back, I had shared the fact, the adventure of that particular thing. Well, I got an email from Joe Pennington at the Evel Knievel Museum. And he had heard the podcast, and he said, man, thank you for sharing your tale about the Snake River Canyon. He said, I love stories of Evel Knievel, especially from the perspective of kids. He said, aside from your trampling experience, Evel was generally super kind to children, which I knew he was. Like I said, when I said I knew it wasn't Evel's fault, he was facing certain death. So the last thing he was thinking about was, the press or kids or anything like that. But Joe goes on to say, I wanted you to know that we have an extensive collection of materials here at the Evel Knievel Museum. They're being added all the time. And he said, I would be happy to look through the archives to see if we can find any photos or footage of you at the bottom of the stairs waiting for the King of Daredevils to descend. He said, can you help me narrow down the search? He had several press conferences. Do you remember which day? Do you remember what you were wearing? All that kind of thing. So I get in touch with Joe, and I have a long conversation with him. And I start going through the memories, and he's like, that's amazing that you can remember all that. And it's like, as a kid, it was such a momentous day. You can't forget that. So he starts sending me some pictures, crowd shots and this and that. And I flip through them. He sends me about 5 pictures. And I'm flipping through them, and they're just shots of that time, that era. And like he said, there was a lot of pictures of women with no tops on and that kind of thing. So yeah, and I remember that too. That was kind of my parents going, okay, we're not going to look over there right now. And we're like, what? We were too young to care. Evel Knievel was in the house. That's all we could care about. Anyway, so I'm flipping through the pictures, and all of a sudden, here's the picture. And there it is. It's Evel Knievel up on this podium. The stage was about 5-6 feet up. And sure enough, there they were. All these people are camped around it. And you see the staircase going down, and there's a whole line of people waiting off to the side of that staircase. And I am on the other side of those people. You can't see me because I'm blocked out by all these adults. But that was exactly it. And I'm like, I am standing on the other side of all of those people waiting at the bottom of the stairs. And it was crazy because as soon as I saw the picture, all the memories kept flooding back. I knew immediately that was the thing. And the craziest part is as I looked through the pictures, there was a guy in a yellow shirt, a rather large guy with a yellow shirt, and he had a brown leather belt on, standing there with a camera. That's the guy that elbowed me in the face when he came by during the trampling thing. I remember the yellow shirt, and I remember that brown belt because that's right where my head was it's how short I was at the time. I was just a kid. But I was looking at that going, I couldn't help thinking, so who was that guy? And all of those people. And whatever became of them. I'm sure they're probably not around anymore. It was cool. They're still continuing to look through some of the pictures. And there might be one from the other side. And if there is one, there's no question you'll see me there. I was also wondering if maybe you could see my parents or somebody. But it was a big crowd, and it was a mess. So I didn't see anybody I recognized there. But man, that setup, it was really something to kind of go back and see that captured right at that time. So even though I wasn't in the picture, theoretically I was. You just couldn't see me. So that was awesome. And I want to say thank you to Joe for sending that, getting in touch with me. It would be great to get a shot of the trampling thing. That'd be awesome. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Make sure that you check out the Gears TV website. We got all kinds of cool stuff there. We got a couple new die casts coming out. Got some books coming out. We have all kinds of things going on. But the most important thing is get out there and turn some wrenches yourself. Get a project. If you don't have one, start working on it. And if you don't have tools, check out Cornwell. They can help you out there.